Whenever I hear that the next Federal Reserve Chair has a secret plan to cancel America's debt, I know I am looking at the same mistake I have watched investors make for decades. They wait for one dramatic event to explain a long structural shift. They imagine one man, one meeting, one announcement, one magic lever. That is not how big financial outcomes happen. America's debt problem is real. The pressure on savers is real. The risk to purchasing power is real. But the people waiting for a cinematic reset are staring at the wrong thing. The real story is quieter, slower, and far more dangerous because it does not feel dangerous while it is happening. It feels normal. That is how wealth gets transferred. Right now, the United States is carrying nearly $39 trillion of federal debt, and the interest bill alone has become one of the largest claims on the federal budget. The number is so large that most people stop thinking the moment they hear it. Their brain files it under impossible, abstract, somebody else's problem. That is where the mistake begins, because debt at that scale does not stay abstract. It leaks into every asset price, every real return, every savings decision, every retirement plan, every choice between holding cash and owning productive assets. And if you misunderstand the mechanism, you end up protecting yourself against the wrong risk. Most people think the danger is default. I do not. A country that borrows in its own currency does not usually choose the clean explosion. It chooses the quiet erosion. That is the first principle. The second principle is just as important. Social media loves to tell people that the Federal Reserve is secretly a private club owned by Wall Street and run for the benefit of insiders. That story survives because it is simple, emotional, and easy to repeat. The truth is more nuanced, and because it is more nuanced, most people never learn it. The Federal Reserve System is not owned in the ordinary way people mean when they use that word. The Board of Governors is a federal agency. The reserve banks have a hybrid structure with member bank stock that does not operate like normal corporate ownership, and monetary policy is set by the Federal Open Market Committee, which has 12 voting members, not one king with a magic wand. That matters, because if you think one chair can walk in, flip a switch, slash rates, erase the debt burden, and send you safely into prosperity, you are already thinking like prey. What people online are really sensing, even when they describe it badly, is something much more important. They are sensing that when a nation carries very large debts, the system begins to prefer solutions that reduce the real burden of those debts without ever admitting that is what it is doing. That is the real playbook. Not cancellation, dilution, not confession, repricing, not a single grand event. A long period in which cash, fixed claims, and passive savers lose ground while real assets, productive businesses, and pricing power absorb the inflationary pressure better than the public expects. I have seen some version of this movie before. When people study debt, they make a common mistake. They look only at the face value. They do not ask what a dollar will buy 10 years from now. They measure wealth in nominal terms and then act surprised when their lifestyle shrinks even though the statement balance looks respectable. That is not analysis. That is self-deception with numbers on top of it. So let us slow this down and walk through the real sequence. First, understand the true problem. The problem is not that Washington wakes up tomorrow and announces, "We are defaulting." The problem is that the country can continue paying its debts while paying them back in dollars that are worth less in real terms. If you owe a fixed amount and the currency weakens over time, the burden shrinks. The debt may still be there on paper, but the real cost gets transferred somewhere else. Where does it go? To the holders of cash, to the holders of long-duration fixed income assets, to savers who mistake stability of statement value for stability of purchasing power, to workers whose wages lag the cost of living, to retirees who planned in nominal numbers and ignored real ones. This is why the dangerous phrase in finance is not debt crisis. It is everything is fine, because when everything looks fine, people sit in the wrong assets for too long. That brings me to the historical loop most people miss. After World War II, the United States came out of the war with a debt load larger relative to the economy than the country carries today. The debt-to-GDP ratio then fell dramatically over the following decades. A lot of people like to tell that story as a clean victory of growth. Growth helped. But growth was not the whole story. Inflation mattered. Policies that held real returns down mattered. The system did not simply earn the debt. It also reduced the real burden through a long stretch in which savers were paid less than inflation often justified. That is the phrase many people now rediscover and then repeat without fully understanding it. Financial repression, it sounds dramatic, but the idea is simple. Keep real returns low enough for long enough, and the debt load becomes easier to carry. That does not require a villain in a dark room. It requires incentives. Governments do not like austerity because voters hate it. Governments do not like crushing tax increases because voters notice them instantly. Governments prefer the path that spreads the pain broadly, slowly, and confusingly enough that no single moment feels like the theft. That is why inflation paired with below-market real returns has such a long history. It is politically smoother, it is financially quieter, and for the average household, it is easier to misunderstand. Now we enter the most important loop in this whole story. Who wins, who loses? If you miss this, you miss everything. When the real value of money falls, the winners are usually people who own productive claims on the economy, businesses with pricing power equities tied to real earnings growth, real estate with durable demand, scarce assets that cannot be printed, ownership interests that reprice as the nominal system drifts upward. The losers are usually the people who believe safety begins and ends with not seeing volatility, people sitting heavily in cash because uncertainty makes them feel disciplined, people locking too much of their future into long-duration claims at fixed rates while inflation risk is being underpriced. People who think a salary is protection even when the salary rises more slowly than the cost of life. People who tell themselves, at least I'm not taking risk, while their purchasing power is being sanded down year after year. I learned a long time ago that the market does not punish confusion immediately. That is why confusion survives so long. If you buy a bad business, the price may rise for a while. If you hold too much cash, your account may look stable for a while. If you let inflation outrun your compounding, you may still feel comfortable for a while. The delay is what kills people, because the delayed consequence lets the wrong behavior feel reasonable. This is where the most dangerous myth enters. The myth says the right response is to find the one asset, the one trade, the one guru, the one heroic call that wins the whole decade. I do not believe that. I do not believe in one square investing, especially in a period like this. A lot of people react to debt fears by concentrating everything in one theme: all gold, all tech, all crypto, all real estate, all foreign markets, all short-term cash. It feels intelligent because it feels decisive. Usually it is just another form of emotional comfort. In a world shaped by debt dilution and policy drift, concentration is often disguised fragility. You do not need theatrical conviction. You need resilient positioning. That is a very different thing. So let me give you the framework I would use if I were trying to protect a family from the slow burn version of this problem. 3 steps. Simple in wording, difficult in execution, valuable because they are difficult. Step 1. Measure your wealth in purchasing power, not dollars. This sounds small. It is not small at all. Most people look at a portfolio and ask, did it go up? I ask a different question. What can it buy now compared with what it could buy before? If the market rose 12% and your money rose 3%, you did not preserve wealth, just because the number is larger. If housing, healthcare, insurance, food, and energy outran your compounding, you lost ground in the only unit that matters. The goal is not a bigger pile of currency. The goal is a larger claim on real life. So tonight I would write down 3 things: what your liquid assets are worth, what your annual spending requires in today's dollars, and what portion of your wealth is positioned to reprice if the dollar's purchasing power keeps slipping. That exercise alone will wake a lot of people up. Step 2. Favor productive assets over idle certainty. Notice what I did not say. I did not say speculate recklessly. I did not say chase every inflation hedge. I did not say buy whatever is loudest online. I said favor productive assets. That means businesses that can raise prices without destroying demand. Assets linked to real economic activity. Ownership that benefits from nominal growth instead of getting trapped beneath it. There is a reason great businesses matter so much. In a period of currency erosion, a weak business absorbs higher costs and suffers. A strong business passes them through. The weak one gets pinned. The strong one adjusts. If you own enough of the strong ones over time, the compounding tends to work in your favor. That does not mean there will be no drawdowns. It means you are at least standing on the side of the system where repricing can help you instead of hurt you. And if you own hard assets or inflation-sensitive exposures, own them as a complement to a coherent plan, not as a substitute for thinking. Panic diversification is not strategy. Step 3. Avoid the silent traps. There are always traps in periods like this, and they rarely look like traps. At first, trap number 1 is long-duration complacency. People stretch for certainty at the exact moment. Certainty is being mispriced. They lock up too much capital for too long at returns that look acceptable only if inflation behaves. If inflation does not behave, the math turns against them while they are still telling themselves they chose the prudent route. Trap number 2 is oversized cash. I like liquidity. I have always liked liquidity. But there is a difference between liquidity and lifestyle. Size surrender. Cash is a tool. Cash is dry powder. Cash is optionality. Cash is not a religion. If you hold more than your real buffer requires because uncertainty makes you feel virtuous, you are probably paying for emotional comfort with long-term purchasing power. Trap number 3 is paralysis. This one may be the worst of all. People know something is wrong, but because the solution is not perfect, they do nothing. They sit in familiar allocations, they keep the same exposures, they wait for more clarity, then more time passes. Then the price levels reset, then the market leadership changes, then the wealth transfer they were afraid of becomes the wealth transfer they lived through in investing. Doing nothing is sometimes wisdom in structural regimes. Doing nothing is often a decision disguised as neutrality. Now let me go one level deeper, because this is where the emotional truth of the whole story lives. The average person does not lose in a debt-heavy era because they are stupid. They lose because the system attacks exactly what feels safest. It attacks idle cash. It attacks nominal thinking. It attacks the instinct to wait until the signal is obvious. By the time the signal is obvious, the repricing has usually already happened. That is why the people closest to the system usually move earlier. Not because they are morally superior, not because they have secret prophecies, because they understand the rules sooner. The gap between Wall Street and Main Street is often less about intelligence than about timing and framing. One side understands that policy is gradual but directional. The other side waits for headlines dramatic enough to justify action. And because those headlines almost never arrive in a clean way, the waiting continues. Let me bring this down to household level. If I were speaking to a couple in their late 50s or early 60s, I would tell them this: do not obsess over whether there is a secret plan. Assume there is no secret plan. Assume something more realistic and more dangerous. Assume policymakers, institutions, and markets will keep adapting in ways that make debt more bearable in real terms and make passivity more expensive than it appears. Then build from there. Ask yourself what percentage of your future depends on fixed nominal promises. Ask yourself how much of your retirement model assumes low inflation, stable real returns, and no repricing shock. Ask yourself whether your portfolio is built for comfort or for durability. Those are the adult questions, and if you can answer them, honestly, you are already ahead of most people. Because most people are still arguing about personalities, they are still arguing about whether one chair, one administration, one Senate hearing, one nomination, one buzzword like AI, one rate cut, or one policy pivot will determine everything. I do not think that is how serious money is made. Serious money is protected by understanding the structure before the crowd is forced to admit the structure exists. So here is my final test for you. If the dollar lost meaningful purchasing power over the next decade, if real returns on safe-looking assets disappointed, if inflation stayed sticky enough to erode cash but not dramatic enough to trigger panic, would your current positioning make you richer, poorer, or merely more confused? That is the question, not whether America's debt gets canceled, not whether the next Fed chair says the right words, not whether the internet can turn a structural transition into a catchy slogan. The real question is whether your money is sitting where silent erosion can eat it or where repricing can work for you. I would not wait for the answer to become obvious. By then, the transfer is already underway. The people who come through periods like this with their wealth intact are rarely the ones who predicted every policy move. They are the ones who understood the direction of the machine and refused to stand in front of it. That is what I would do. And if you are honest with yourself, you probably already know which parts of your financial life are standing in the wrong place.